Hey guys, welcome to Thursday in week 3. We're reading out of Isaiah 61, 1 through 3, New Living Translation. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon me. The Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to comfort the brokenhearted and to proclaim that the captives will be released and prisoners will be freed. He has sent me to tell those who mourn the time of the Lord's favor has come, and with it, the day of God's anger against their enemies. To all who mourn in Israel, he will give a crown of beauty for ashes, a joyous blessing instead of mourning, festive praise instead of despair. In their righteousness, they will be like great oaks that the Lord has planted for his own glory.
Mm.
I love that ending.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. And then that just harkens to the great oaks that the Lord has planted. It's like you're now the tree of life. Like Psalm 1, you'll be like
Right.
by the stream.
Right. The tree by the stream. I know that's what I was thinking too.
It's so good. So I right before this, I had a hunch, and then I was like, "Oh, right," and we looked it up. 61:1 through part of 2 is what Jesus reads from the scroll of Isaiah and proclaims, "You have seen this fulfilled now."
Yeah.
And that he is basically saying, like, Jesus is here to fulfill all of these things, to release the prisoners, to comfort the brokenhearted, to proclaim that the captives are free. And it's just such a good it's such a good thing to just keep in mind how much God does for those who are not in, like, they're not everything looks right. Like, for those who are like going through the hardest things that we could possibly bear, he is here to comfort us in that.
Right. Yeah, I was just reading down at the bottom. I don't know if you guys ever noticed when I say I was reading, like, you think I'd remember.
What you wrote?
So much though.
Yeah.
But I was reading, so like one of the things we were talking about was like the different titles, like where he says like the poor, the brokenhearted, captives, prisoners, those who mourn. So he kind of has these different titles that he throws out there that are very similar to the Sermon on the Mount. And then, so the Kingdom of God, the song for today, is actually like he's basically kind of singing through the Sermon on the Mount, which is really beautiful, but it ties into this passage as well. But then I was looking down at the bottom and I like continued kind of from those questions of like, can you identify with any of these things? Like, some of us have grown up in the church. Some of us have found God later. Some of us grew up in the church, you know, ran rampant for a while and then came back.
Yeah.
So we all have like different places that we come from, but I'm sure that we can all identify with some portion of this. And one of the things I talked about was like, there's the physical reality of this. Like, people are brokenhearted. I've been literally brokenhearted in my life before. I've had to mourn. But then there's the captives and the prisoners. Like, unfortunately, there are captives and there are prisoners.
Yeah.
Especially, not that there are in America as well, but especially in other countries, like prisoners are particularly oftentimes like innocent, right? Like they're not supposed to be in prison, which is a lot of what, some of what's happening back then too. But so like that, like metaphorical idea though. Like, what are you captive to? What are you being held prisoner to? But then I went on to ask, like, do you trust Jesus enough to come to him from your place of need? Because so much of where Jesus, like, literally said, like, I came for the sick, not for the well. Like, I didn't come here. Like, a doctor doesn't go and, like, check on the people who are not in the hospital. Like, they go to the hospital where people are sick, or the doctor's office, right?
His ministry was the lost sheep of Israel.
Yeah.
Like, that's who he's coming for.
Yeah. And so, but if we aren't willing to like bring our hurt and our pain and our brokenness and our suffering, because sometimes that's caused by ourselves, but sometimes it's caused by the world, sometimes it's caused by people around us, or circumstances that we have no control over, but it can be really hard depending on how Jesus has been depicted to you in your experience, in your relationship with him.
Yeah.
It can be hard sometimes to come to him from that place of brokenness where we feel like we want to come and be whole before him.
Right. Well, I feel like, I mean, growing up, sometimes you would have like bad depictions of God, where it's like Jesus is the nice guy in the New Testament,
Oh, right.
but then God in the Old Testament is always angry.
Right.
But then you see, like, just from the last, from yesterday we read, like, Jesus is the face of the unseen God.
Right.
So Jesus' heart for us and the goodness that we see in him is God's goodness that we see for us. And that when he says, like, I want to do all this, it's the same. He's doing the will of his Father.
Right. He's only able to do it through God. He literally says that.
Yes, and he's doing the will of his Father to come for the lost sheep of Israel. And like you were saying, how all of this is kind of like the metaphorical prisons that we have for our mind. And lately, I feel like my whole worldview has just been like kind of shaken up, where I'm like, the spiritual world is actually more real than the physical world sometimes. Even though it's hard to see, it's like, even though it's like, I can touch this, I can touch everything around. But God asks us to pray. And growing up, I always felt weird praying because I'm like, I feel like I'm just speaking to the sky.
Right.
But in fact, it's like God does hear the prayers. Right. I mean, oftentimes in Exodus or any time, or in Jonah, we're reading and it says, God says, the cries of my people have come up to me. So he is hearing our cries out when we are brokenhearted, when we are captive, when we are mourning. And his heart is nothing but to come and comfort us and to free us of those things that are holding us captive. And it could be, and most of the time now, it's like metaphorical, like just our addictions. Because addictions, the term is like, we oftentimes think of like drug use or alcohol use, but it's like,
which is again real, but like, you know what I mean? But I don't look up enough. Like, I don't know statistically. But if you look at, like, if you actually tracked how much time you spent on your phone, you tracked how much time you spent watching TV. You know, like whatever your thing is.
You're a functioning addict.
Yeah.
According to actual.
Or video games, you know, whatever your thing is. Yeah, you're a functioning addict. And I think, you know, there's just so many things that we don't realize are like pulling our attention away.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like I should share this. It's really funny. I didn't even tell you this story. Well, I told you this story, but I actually didn't tell you this other part of it.
Good. Let it all out now.
So I was driving and we had just finished doing a video. And what did I have to go buy? Do you remember this? I like had to go get something at the store. I don't remember what it was, but I was like, shoes. We couldn't find Evelyn's shoes. And she'd already gone to school. She wears uniforms. She'd already gone to school with these shoes. And I was like, I have to go buy her shoes. Like, we have no idea where your shoes went.
Turns out they're under the couch.
They're under the couch behind some dog toys, you know, whatever. So now we have backup here. So great. So I'm driving to the store and we had literally just been talking about hearing God's voice. Okay. And I'm on the road and I'm like getting close to C, but I need to get to 83. And I literally like feel like God's telling me to get off at C. And I was like, but that's not even the place I need to go. Like, I don't need to go to C. I need to go to 83. And I passed it. And I literally had this feeling of like, you're supposed to go there. And I was like, and I literally was like, in my head, I was like, I'm just making stuff up.
Oh my God.
Okay. Immediately after C, these cars come up behind me. This was when that road rage. And these cars, this one car, I have no idea what happened. All of a sudden they just passed me. When they passed me kind of like I didn't think about it. But then all of a sudden they're in front of me on the left lane. And this one car, all of a sudden pulls in front of the other car and like slams on his brakes. This car slams on his brakes, fishtails, whips into the other lane. And I hit my brakes. And thank God there wasn't like a ton of cars on the road because it was like later in the day. And as it's happening, I'm just like so shocked by this entire thing. Cause then they're like following each other. It was, I've never seen anything like, I mean, I've seen people doing kind of stuff, but not anything like this. Like the fact that one of them didn't crash in a very bad crash was shocking. I didn't even think about it until I got off in 83, like all this stuff said, I was like, call bearings. I was like, this is crazy. I don't know what's going on. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, maybe that's why God told me to get off on C. I was just talking about the voice of God. Yeah. Anyways, but I'm saying that to say that like, that was like this little voice. And I was like, literally, we had just been talking about it. I still was like, I don't think that was God.
Right.
But I've noticed recently, like over the last couple of weeks, there's been all of these moments where I was really stressed. I mean, there's literally one night I barely slept. because I was so stressed about all of these things that were needing to happen.
Yeah.
And every single thing that I was worried about worked out perfectly.
Oh yeah.
Like things that didn't like that I was
Yeah.
worried about that I thought I was gonna have to take
Yeah.
care of, all of a sudden got taken care of. Things that I was like, oh, I don't know, like all of a sudden people were like, oh, I actually, I got that thing, like whatever. And it was like everything I had been stressed about, like everything just worked out. And I was like, I literally wasn't even sleeping.
Yeah.
I was so worried. And so I think like there is like the addiction,
Yeah.
but there's also like and I'm not talking about medical, like I'm not talking when you have like anxiety is like, a medically diagnosed mental health issue. I'm just talking about like general worry, anxiety, fear.
Yeah.
Like there are things that we like hold ourselves captive.
Yeah.
And like the stress I was feeling over all these different things. And I just feel like God was like trying to get my attention. Like, are you going to trust me?
Yeah.
Are you going to trust me in your life?
Yeah.
Not just with your life, but like in your daily actions, in your daily decisions. Are you going to trust me? And come to me and like allow me to participate in filling your needs.
Yeah, that's so good.
And not just like expect myself to show up all the time.
Yeah, because I witnessed that with you on the day of the parade.
Yeah.
Where you're like, oh look, everything just lined up perfectly. And I was like, thank you, God. But
it was really stressful. Yeah.
Stressing, but then it all happened to just
and everything was just exactly the way it needed to be. In fact, I had to come to the church to get a bunch of stuff, and I thought it was in the way because there was a play going on, and then something ended up not working, and they couldn't fix it. I mean, it was just something very, very minimal. But I was like, oh, and I like ran up and I was able to fix it for them, and I was like, maybe
I was supposed
to be here at this time, and in a place of like what I was feeling was like stress.
Yes.
Was God being like, no, I actually needed you.
Yeah. And I think when the stress of life hits us, it's such a good reminder to be like, I do not know God's ways, but his ways are good.
Right.
And he is good.
Right.
And so just to have that reminder to know that God is in full control.
Right.
And his ways are good. And it might not feel like that in a moment.
Right.
But in the end,
right,
it will all be out for good.
Right. He will turn it for good.
Oh, yeah.
I always like to point that out because I've had in my own personal life and with people who are very close to me, people experience really, really awful things in their life. And people are like, oh, this is God's will. And I'm like, that's not what the Bible tells us. The Bible tells us that he will turn it for good.
Yeah.
Just because God is able to take bad and evil things and turn them for good does not mean that he made them happen.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's where that whole deal of free will comes in. And we talked about that with sin entering this world and how like even nature, like we are living in a broken world. Everything in this world is broken.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of this comes down to trust. And that's like where that question of like, do you trust Jesus enough to come from a place of need? Whatever that need is, whether it's like a really intense addiction or just maybe something that you need to make some like priority adjustments with, or maybe it's that trust thing of like, can I trust in God that either he's going to give me the strength to get through this, right? Like he'll make sure I have the strength to get through this difficult thing, or he'll bring people around me to support me, or he'll just work out the situation. I mean, it was ridiculous this last weekend, how stressed I was about all these things and how everything was just like,
there you go.
There you go. And it's not to say it wasn't hard. Like there's a reason I was exhausted on Sunday, but it was like good.
Yeah.
That just makes me think of the C.S. Lewis, where he isn't safe, but he's good.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Anyways.
I think that's a good place.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow.